Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today, and this is a continuation of my in-depth guide series. We're on to nature. As per usual, the pinned comment is going to have timestamps to each relevant section of the guide. So if you want to skip to the melee, single target range for might, if you want to skip to the healing section, any of the precision ones, they're all going to be timestamped there. So look for that in the description. I also have my previous guide linked as well in the description of the video, just in case you want to check out that. In terms of nature, I do want to have a disclaimer out for this video. I will not be showing any what I personally believe to be exploit rotations. They're not technically exploits. They are broken rotations, so I'm not going to be showing any of those for the might side or the precision side. So if you want to find that somewhere else and ask in game or find another video, these are going to be rotations that are going to be lasting because there's obviously nothing wrong with them. I will say, not so much a disclaimer, but another fact as well with nature is that you really have to make two choices. If you want better melee damage, you're going to be super speed movement power because of access to Whirling Dervish and Vortex Trap technically. And if you want higher single target damage, then it's going to be acrobatics with access to grapple line and zip tie attack. Now with the emergence of the Impaling Thorns finisher buff, that's not as prevalent for acrobats anymore. You can get away with it in super speed, but that's your options. You cannot be flight or skimming if you want to maximize your damage whatsoever with nature. Is going to have to be a choice between super speed and acrobatics. With the focus on melee damage in the game now, it's going to be super speed more often than not, but if you want to have any kind of optimal damage whatsoever, it's going to have to be either super speed or acrobatics. So if you're flight and skimming, there are rotations that are going to work for you, but you're going to be missing a whole lot of damage, especially on the single target side, that you could have had if you're super speed or acrobatics. So normally I don't show the movement mode variants in videos. I will be including it for nature just because of how focused nature is on those movement mode power sets, either super speed or acrobatics. Okay, so in terms of a DPS spec for nature, it looks very similar towards other power sets. Weapon tree, you're only taking the 1 and 8 for your weapon. Doesn't matter what you pick. That's your preference. In terms of acrobatics, I'm taking the just the resistance ones. You can take the recovers too, just extra skill points. I'm not really running into issues with power on my melee build. If you are super speed, you would be taking super speed down to the bottom of the tree to get Dervish if you're using that in your rotation, or Vortex Track too. There's some DPS that run Vortex Trap on their nature as well, so you would have to spec down to that. Iconic powers, you'd be taking Sonic Cry, and then your stat points, super powered spec, maxing critical attack chance, critical attack damage, might and power be maxed, and then because of your melee build and you're not doing weapon taps at all in gorilla form, you'll be using health. That's what's going to be your survivability, because you do need survivability in this build because it's so heavily dependent on supercharge. The last thing you want to do is pop your supercharge and then die. Not only do you have a death not doing any damage, but your dots are going to drop because you don't have Thornburst to refresh them, and you just wasted a supercharge and have to go back into Wolf to set up all your dots again. So you want to have as much survivability as you can in a build like this. In terms of augments, adaptive augments are going to be might, obviously. Your origin augments are going to be might as well. In my generator mods, which you don't see here, you're going to have max might, so 4 in might. I choose to put 4 in power, just as a general method. You can put 4 in health if you wish. I choose to do power. That's more so just a carryover from previous power sets where might does struggle in power. Nature doesn't struggle as much, but still, it's nice to have power. But if you want to have your maximum survivability, you go health. So in terms of your weapons, you're going to have Blast Adapter in your weapon. Head mod, there's no head mod specifically that's going to be beneficial. I mean, you could technically take critical Primal Wolf form, but the 2% crits is not going to really make that much of a difference because you already run the transformation card. So if you're only running Wolf, you can use this head mod if you'd like. Since I'm using a universal build, so I will be having a mix of melee and single target. Single target's obviously going to be Gorilla, and you want to have that 5% supercharge back on Gorilla. Neck mod's going to be escalating might. Back mod, once again, there's no specific back mod for nature. So it's just Berserkers have a little bit extra potential damage. But if you want to use the breakout recoveries or innates or something else, then you perfectly can do that. Chest mod's going to be penetrating strikes. Leg mod, there's no scaling. You could technically do like, I think it's like restorative serpent call, but I mean there's no kind of health scaling whatsoever on the leg mods anymore, so don't worry about it. In terms of hand mods, it's going to be max damage. Foot mods, going to be tumbling mastery. In terms of your trinkets, supply drop and orbital is going to be basic, DPS trinket, and then since this is a melee build, I have a melee focused trinket, which is going to be the Sunken Rune from the summer event. That's the highest damage in terms of a single trinket, not using the 4 boos. But if you're running something else, you could technically take like the snake turret or something like that. But since this is a melee AoE build, then you want to do that, or you just change your trinkets up depending on what it is. And then the artifacts for this build are going to be Transformation Card, Scrap the Soul Cloak, and Eye of the Gemini, because this build heavily focuses on using Wolf to refresh your supercharge and go into your crit. So you want to make sure that you have as max supercharge as you can with Scrap the Soul Cloak, that you're consistently earning it quickly, and then you're getting the extra Gemini damage as well. From going into Wolf consistently, you get that Pollux's Gay, which is 20% to your damage and everyone around you. So you get basically the 20% damage from all the Prec DPS using Doomspin, all the Rage DPS, Rage Prec using Berserk, everything else. You get 20% of all of that damage. So Gemini isn't as much helpful anymore in terms of now that we have transformation strategy, stuff like that, but it is still heavily focused on builds that rely on their supercharge, say like Earth, Nature, Electric, stuff like that, that are consistently using their supercharge. Okay, you don't really need too much explaining with the melee rotation that I'm using here. Obviously, when you first set up your dots, almost 1,000,000 damage right off the bat. That has the Gemini damage, but that's just your personal Gemini damage. So that's not even including the 4 or 5 other DPS that are all doing their supercharges, everything else on ads, that you get their damage, well, 20% of their damage, as well as you get the 5% extra damage itself. Because if your Gemini is at 200, when you use it, I can't see the... Once you get down to the bottom. So, standing in a Pollux case grants you 5% might, precision, and vitalization. So you also get that as well with that Gemini. So that boosts your first stats as well. So that's why you're looking at, when you get the first parsers there, 99, 89, 73. At that point, the wolf crits have worn off, so you go back into it, 80, 1.1 mil, 80, and same thing, and rinse and repeat. So I use 2 wolves there. So basically, I look at it like every 30 seconds, I try to go back into wolf, depending on how long the fight's going, depending on everything else. But obviously, you'd want to use your wolf either after 20 seconds or after the third parse, just so you can refresh your crits. But after that, I'm still at, 98% of my supercharge bar, so there's still plenty of opportunity for me to go back into Wolf and reuse it with Scrap the Soul Cloak, earning back my supercharge with me having Serpent Call. So if there was, say, I didn't want to go back into Wolf on the next set of ads, I can set up 2 dots, Serpent, and Briar, go back into those 3 rotations, and then once there's a new set of ads, pop back out. So it's just, Could you squeak up more damage by putting Robot Psychic on? Sure, you got another probably 2k to the parse. Could you eke out more damage if you probably did through Heat Vision in? Probably, but that's not going to be as practical for raiding situations because you can't move along with the raids here and be stuck in the animation of Heat Vision. So there are, of course, adding Dervish is going to be more damage. So basically, if you were super speed and wanted to be Dervish, you would basically just at that point, where did Wolf go? You can take off Savage Growth or Sonic Cry and run Dervish instead. You can also, I've seen DPS run like Vortex Trap as well. Vortex Trap, same thing. You're going to be stuck positioning wise, but Vortex and Dervish and Thornburst, Robot Psychic as well. So there's plenty of opportunity for max damage quotation marks. But it's not going to be always practical in certain situations. So this rotation, as you can see, you're just yourself alone, you're still getting over 1 million parse. Yes, that's a 10-second parse, but that's including Gemini damage, crits, and stuff like that as well, which will even out. But it'd be more damage within counting all the extra DPS. So it's just something that using Gemini and Scrap, you can consistently get those types of parsers because you can consistently refresh your Wolf crits and then have still tons of supercharge left over. As you saw, I used 2 Wolves, still at 98%. So once again, it's going to be in the eye of the beholder. If you want to change around the rotation at your prerogative, there's going to be certain situations where other rotations are going to be max damage, certain situations where those are actually going to hurt you in the long run. But it's going to be ultimately your choice. But I chose the safest route in terms of damage for the purpose of this guide, and I always will, because my goal is to make the average player better, and this is what is going to make the average player better. It's the least things that can go wrong with this type of rotation. But like I said, if you want to run something different or sub in different powers of your super speed, then by all means do so, and then you'll see what your damage is. Okay, so I do want to add this disclaimer for nature melee as well, because there's a whole bunch of variations you're going to see with the rotations here. I'm not going to include them all. We're going to talk about it here. Obviously, there's the broken ones as well, but I'm not going to be touching on the broken ones. But in terms of loadouts, you have a lot of flexibility with a Wolf setup. So this is more of like a classic loadout that I run here, just because it's minimizes risk, and it's suitable for alerts, open world content, whatever. So you're always going to have your 3 dots as regardless. You're going to have versus plans just in case you have to do a little bit of damage outside of it. But same thing like I could do for Gorilla. You don't have to do that. You could drop Harvest and put Robot Psychic in there. And then in Wolf form, you have Robot Psychic as well. So you have your 3 damaging power, Thornburst, Sonic Cry, and Savage Growth. And then you would have like Robot Psychic and then basically leftover and Serpent Call. You could technically switch up your artifacts, drop Gemini. Like if you don't want to keep refreshing Wolf, because the main thing with Wolf is that if we go into Wolf form, so we have the 15 critical ability, weapon, and ability chances, 10% damage increase. So we've got all these crits that you get from Wolf. That's why you see that the spike parses when you go into Wolf. Now, the thing is, if you're not going to constantly refresh those buffs, then it's kind of pointless to run Scrap the Soul Cloak and Gemini. So if you want to stay in Wolf the entire time or just drop to set up your dots and not go back into it ever again, then it's pointless to run Scrap and Gemini in that kind of case. Myself, I'm always making sure that as much as I can drop and go back into it. It's more of like managing your supercharge. You have to know that, okay, do I have to save 50% for a single target fight coming up? Is it not necessary? Can I use Wolf instead of Gorilla? Like if there's absolutely no AoE component to it, Gorilla doesn't matter as much because Impaling Thorns, you don't have to worry about that AoE damage. Like if it's going to be single target fight you don't have to worry about, then you don't have to save supercharge for Gorilla. You can go strictly into Wolf. Do you have a supercharge spammer in the group, whether it's going to be the Broken Bug form or another tank or a nature that's providing supercharge with Gemini, then you have much greater access to completely spam this with Wolf to make sure you refresh your crits. But if you're not going to be doing that, then Scrap the Soul Cloak, and if Gemini doesn't work in that case, then you would use at that point, you could switch to like Storm the Fire and use Heat Vision. You can also run the Strategist card as well, so more of a typical setup there, where now on Wolf you would have like Heat Vision. I haven't Spec Heat Vision, but technically you would have Heat Vision. You could have Robot Psychic, and then basically your 3 damaging powers like Savage Growth, Sonic Cry, and Thornburst. You could run, if you're super speed variant, obviously be running Whirling Dervish instead. Or I've seen some use Vortex Trap as well. So there's basically so many variations for Wolf. And the thing is, like I said previously, Nature is basically like the sparring target king. You're going to have such inflated rotations on the sparring targets just because your dots are never going to drop. You can maximize all your damage. The sparring targets don't move. It's everything. So it's basically the most optimal situation you're going to have is running on the sparring target. So it's going to be skewed the damage that you're going to get in a raid. So basically there's so many variations of Wolf that you can do. This one is also safe because you got Serpent Call and Briar, so you got 2 dots in Wolf. So say you don't have enough Supercharge, or it's not worth it to set up Supercharge to the next set of ads. You've got Serpent Call, Briar, 2 dots, Brighten a Thornburst, and Savage Growth and Sonic Cry. So it's what I run is the much safer and build that you can run it. Isn't going to be the most optimal. You're going to get the most highest possible damage and squeak out every little bit of damage you can with this rotation. No, that's not going to be the case. Is this going to be a rotation that's going to be suiting you for all types of content? Yes, this is going to be the one that's going to do that. You don't have to worry about Robot Psychic. You don't have to worry about managing your Supercharge. So it just depends what you want to do with it. There's so many different variations you can run. So if you don't have the Gemini level or Grapple Soul Cloak level, don't worry about it. You can sub in like Strategist, because the Strategist will do just as well. So it just depends on what you want to do. So essentially I have this, basically the Gemini for me is substituted by the Strategist because I'll get more overall damage running Gemini myself, managing the Supercharge against all the Prec DPS on the sets of ads, dropping and setting up the dots. Because I have to go into Wolf anyway to set up dots. So I might as well get all that 20% extra Gemini damage. But you have to make sure that the ads are not going to die before Gemini proc. So it's all a tightrope rock. So tightrope walk. I can butchering that pronunciation, but that's all it is. So it's going to be situational. I can't show you every single little rotation because this video will be like 3 hours long. It's just going to be you choosing the right artifacts and the right loadout for the right situation. So the rotation itself doesn't really change. The artifacts may. So if you're constantly seeing the ads die before Gemini even procs, like you're running with a bunch of Prec DPS, just sub that out for Strategist. That's all you have to do. It's still a good idea to keep Scrap because you do want to focus on Wolf, and you'll be going to Wolf a lot to reset up your dots on melee targets. But if that's not the case, if that's not an issue, and you're always having high Supercharge or not going back into it to refresh the crits, then you could run Soul Amplifier for the extra might or run Heat Vision. So you got options available to you. So that's the disclaimer, I guess you could say. Nature is basically in the eye of the beholder. Everyone's going to have a different point of view on running with Wolf or running with Melee. Gorilla doesn't really see much variation at all, but there's a whole bunch of variation with Melee. Because Wolf can be used for 8 targets, it can be used for range, it can be used for Melee. It's just that there's so many different variations to the Wolf rotations. I'm choosing to show you the safest one. Because this is what this guide series is about. It's not, if you're one of the best players in the entire game, or the top DPS, you're not coming to my videos for my rotations. You may take a look to see what I'm running, but my guide series isn't tailored to the top 1% of the game. It's for everyone to improve and get better, which is what this rotation does. This is a safe rotation you can use in duos, alerts, raids, still get optimal damage and still get really high damage. Is it going to be the most optimal squeak out every little bit of damage like I said before? No, it's not. But by doing that, you could sub in Vortex, you can sub in Dervish, you can sub in Strategist card, Heat Vision. Like it doesn't take much to think about what to add and what to change around. This is basically the foundation. So enough of my rambling there. Let's get into the rotation. I just wanted to add that kind of disclaimer just to see my point of view and how I approach Nature DPS in this guide specifically. Okay, so in terms of Nature single target, this is going to be the Gorilla focused build. So in terms of a spec, nothing really changes. Weapon, in terms of all you're doing is taking the innate. Acrobatics, you just need to make sure you take Zip Tie Attack. That'll be the important one. I take the resistant recoveries, you don't need to, but make sure you take Zip Tie Attack. Iconics, you want Heat Vision, Venom Boost, and Robot Psychic. And the stat points, super powered, critical attack damage, maxing out might and power, and then putting the majority of your leftover skill points into precision. This is where it differs slightly. This can be for the gorilla tap damage, which will have a separate section if you want to refer to why I specifically have precision and make sure you always do weapon taps in gorilla. I will have a section covering that, so it'll be in the timestamps, but the majority of your skill points are going to be in precision, and then the kind of leftover is health, because you do get diminishing returns after at least 100 skill points, and precision gets you the 10%. Everything else after that is just basically stats. But you do want some health. You can't have sitting at low base health just for gorilla. But you're not going to be melee, so you don't need that much in health. So in terms of a loadout, that's going to be in human form. It's going to be Serpent Call, Briar, Vine Lash, a gorilla form, Voracious Plants, and Robot Sidekick. Now this is my personal preference. It's technically it's a bit riskier because I'm not having Harvest in human form, so I'm counting on not running out of gorilla supercharges. So I have Robot Sidekick and have Robot Sidekick in gorilla form for some extra passive damage. If you're worried about running out of supercharge, or you're going to have to stick in human for a while to regen your supercharge, then you had Harvest. That's the only main difference there. Where did Harvest disappear to? There it is. So that's what your typical human rotation would be, having Harvest in there just in case you needed it. So that basically you can put 3 dots out, spam Voracious Plants in the meantime, and Harvest until you get your gorilla supercharge earned back. But I am banking on the fact that I'm always going to have it, or I wouldn't use it. So that's why I have Robot Sidekick in there, so that I can have a little bit extra damage. The only other substitution would be if you have a supercharged spammer in the group, you can technically put Neo Venom Boost in here. Once again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but say you've got multiple healers or tanks spamming supercharge for you, you're always at 100%. You could technically pop Neo Venom Boost to go into gorilla and do the regular rotation there. So that's going to be a very niche situation, but that's what you could do as well in terms of sacrificing that. But that's not going to be your everyday rotation. That's just going to be for those super niche situations, just to take advantage of a group spamming supercharge. That's the only time you use that. So in gorilla form, it's going to be Amplified Heat Vision, Impaling Thorns, Zip Tie Attack, Harvest, Return to Normal, and then you have Robot Sidekick, which will be Autobout. So the main difference here is why you don't use Grapple Line Attack. Grapple Line Attack has a lower base damage than Zip Tie Attack and a lower critical magnitude. I've already tested this in my mode video, which you can find on my channel if you search it. But if you have a choice between the two, it's always going to be Zip Tie Attack that's going to win out over Grapple Line Attack. So that's why you'd run it in gorilla form. Normally, you would run Zip Tie Attack and Grapple Line Attack, but Impaling Thorns, with the finisher buffs that happened in this game, I forget, probably within 4 or 5 months. I think it was less than that. But with the finisher buffs, Impaling Thorns actually is more beneficial to run than as second single target power. Plus, most raids nowadays have some kind of AoE component. Like, take a look, say Clock Tower Final Boss, for example, or even Clock Tower First Boss with the 2 sub-bosses. You have single target damage, but when the drones come out, that's AoE. So Impaling Thorns will automatically give you that boost in damage because the gorilla makes it AoE. So it's the same thing with Clock Tower. So the entire Clock Tower fight is going to be just the Oracle single target, but then at the end, the drones come out, and then the tank pulls them in. So basically, you're getting all that extra damage hitting multiple targets compared to what you would normally if you were just running Grapple Line. So it's not much of a I don't think it is a damage loss at all to run Impaling Thorns and instead of Grapple Line and Zip Tie for single target, but you have much higher potential for greater damage with Impaling because there's so much AoE components to single target fights nowadays. And then essentially just have Robot Sidekick on here just for some extra passive damage because recently when they did the was it 103 game update? I think it was game update 103. They increased Robot Sidekick's range damage so that it's basically the same as melee. Not the exact same, but it got buffed considerably compared to what it was really weak before. So now Robot Sidekick is pretty beneficial to run from another range damage. So that's essentially what you'd have there in gorilla form. But basically, if you didn't have that, you could run a supercharge, you could run something else, return normal, you could run, but that's what it is there. So the other main thing you have to remember is you're also running Soul Amplifier for this build because you're running Amplified Heat Vision, and then basically just Transformation and Strategist card because of all the dots you're getting with nature. So those two much more self-explanatory, but just making sure you have Soul Amplifier, that is a must for this loadout rotation as well. So why are taps, or weapon taps, so important, especially in guerrilla form? You can use weapon taps regardless. All it is when someone says they're using weapon taps in between powers is that each power has an animation dovetail that allows you to basically clip in a weapon buff without actually using the power. So basically, say we're going to use a weapon buff and Serpent. So you saw right there. So you saw, it doesn't help as much as with a dot power, but you'll see basically right there, ranged attack, hit sparring target for 1300, and then critically damage sparring target for 3266 before my, not entirely sure what that is. Either way, before my actually Briar hit. It's the same thing. So let's just do Braces Plants instead, just so there's not as much of a dot here. So same thing, weapon tap, Braces Plants. So you saw the 2 weapon taps, same thing if I did each time. So you don't actually see the weapon being used as you saw right there. So say this is me tapping with Braces Plants. So I'm still getting that weapon damage, but it's not actually registering the animation of the weapon tap. So that's all it is. So that you can use that with any power. It just depends on what you want to do. Obviously, you can increase your damage in a raid. It just depends on if you want to do that the entire time, depending on your level of tediousness. But the nice thing about the Gorilla taps is that you'll notice here my actual taps aren't block breakers. My actual block breaker is, which you'll see here. So it's about 6,700 crit, 2,800 base damage with the actual two-handed. So now once we go into Gorilla form, what you'll notice is that my taps are now block breakers. So my simple tap damage went from 2,600 with two-handed, or even 1,600, a lot less. But now my regular tap damage, 10k crits. 10k crits. So you get an extra free 10k damage just from actually... see now that's the strategist card proccing, but same thing. You could do the Gorilla hole, but that's just longer. It's not necessary. So the double advantage of it being the Gorilla taps, the same system as well. So if I do like Harvest, the same thing. I hit Harvest, and I got the weapon tap. So you're not actually seeing me register the tap damage, but I'm actually getting it. And with the Gorilla, since it's a block breaker as well, if the boss or the target is blocking and you are doing Gorilla tap damage and hit that, you get the counter damage as well. So that's why you'll see these videos or see people talking about in Gorilla, they see like a 100k hit. And it's not that strategist or it's not anything they're doing, it's that they're actually getting the block breaker on the boss that's doing the 100k damage. So if you're buffed up on your Prec in a raid, so right now I'm sitting at 23,000 Prec, which is, by no means good. I'm still running all my augments or might and everything. That's just Prec damage on top. So if you get that block breaker in a raid, boom, you've got all that counter damage as well as in your rotation. That's why you see these massive spikes with Gorilla single target damage, is because if they get any kind of counter off, they're always throwing weapon taps in between. So they're always getting that block breaker, damage potentially. So that's all it is. That's why Gorilla taps are so important, because of the actual damage with them. The base damage is very high. Crit damage is just as high on them as well. So it's essentially just free damage as well as the chance to have a block breaker as well. So that's why it's very important that at least on your Gorilla single target builds that you're mixing in the weapon taps in between each power. So on PC, you just be hitting your mouse to click. On PS control, I'm not entirely sure. Is it like a square button or something? I don't. Never been PS, so I can't tell you what button to hit. But obviously, it's just your weapon tap. So whichever square, circle, whatever it is on your controller or your gamepad. But on PC, it's just simple mouse clicks, just in between each power. So that's the importance of using weapon tap damage, just in general, but also it's magnified on Gorilla. Okay, so in terms of gorilla's damage there, 44, that was to set up the nature dots. And then we got 58, 54, 50, 49, 52, 54. So it's obviously going to be dependent on crits. It's going to be dependent on the strategist card. And then basically if any of your hand claps crit as well. So it's going to be crit dependent, but at the same time it's going to be all the potential for extra damage and rage when you have extra targets to use. So it's one of those basically rotations that are lower on sparring targets because you don't have any extra damage. But in raids, the rotation, really peaks when you got all your buffs ticking. When you've got your Nitro buff, when you got your Omega buff, when you've got your Cola buff, you've got your, if anyone's running the Tetra, you've got ads. So, a sparring target, this could be 50k. In the raid, it could be easily like 70 or 80k. I will mention as well, the only difference in rotation-wise, if you say you super speed, instead of zip tie attack, you're using tornado pull. That's all it is. So it's the exact same thing. You're just using tornado pull. I mean, technically, if you're flight or skimming, you could use like lasso or something. But zip tie attack has a much better animation than tornado pulls. Tornado pull's got a much longer dovetail. Tornado pull will do higher damage than zip tie attack, but it's just offset by that longer dovetail animation. But zip tie attack, that's all it is. You just it's still the exact. Anytime your movement mode is the exact same rotation, human and gorilla. Except you sub out zip tie attack for tornado or for lasso or whatever power you want to use single target wise. But that's all the changes in that rotation. Okay, into the alternate Might single target build. This is just going to be running Wolf. So it's the exact same loadout, except technically you could put in Robot Psychic and then drop Summer Call, put Robot Psychic here, and then drop like Harvest into the other one. But the point of this build is that you're going to die all the time, like say you're in elite fights, or if you're just messing around in pugs. Like you can't always sustain a gorilla 50% supercharge. It's not realistic. If there's any kind of multiple group wipes, you're doing no damage. There's no point to be sitting in human form DPSing when you have access to Wolf. So if you want to just sit in human form DPSing until you get your gorilla, you could do that, but you're losing massive damage. It's not worth it. You might as well switch to a build. You can have 4 armories, just one for melee, one for single target, one for Wolf, kind of all purpose, and then one for healing if you want to use, if you're a support power as well. So that's taking advantage of your 4 armories, which is nature you're going to have to. So it's basically the same rotation that I would use in Gorilla, except that you're doing it in Wolf just for the purpose of gaining Supercharge back. So that's why I have Super Call in here, so I can basically use Super Call like every other rotation or clipping in with like a trinket or soda or something. The purpose of this build is to gain Supercharge back and then not really have to worry about wiping, so that I have enough Supercharge that I can switch to a full Gorilla build. So that's the main purpose. That's really the only thing that Matt changes. Obviously, the only big difference is that in Wolf, Impaling Thorns is not going to be AoE damage. It's going to be single target. So say you're doing a fight like Clock Tower. Yes, I'm going to be missing damage because Impaling Thorns is not AoE. But at the same time, I'm doing more damage than I would in like Gorilla human form, waiting like for 5 minutes to get a Gorilla supercharge. So that's the purpose of this build, is just messing around. You need to do a single target fight. You could die. You don't have enough supercharge, etc. So that's the main purpose here. So we can kind of go in and show you quickly what the numbers would look like here. Okay, so you get the idea there. Yes, you technically can reach higher numbers, but that's just because of the wolf crits. That's why it's 57, 56. Obviously, I was just setting up 57. Then I'm dropping down to typical like 36 without the wolf crit. So technically, yeah, you could keep swapping in and out of wolf, but then that defeats the full purpose of getting supercharged to get gorilla, which is the gorilla forms the constant 10% damage buff. So, I mean, you technically can do well good parses in wolf, but I mean, the purpose of this is simply to gain supercharge. So if I wanted to get an extra probably 2,000 damage per second, I could throw on robot sidekick, but you could do that if you want, but I'm running this just so that I can farm supercharge in between as much as I can with Serpent Call, just so that I can go back to using Gorilla. So just basically just an alternate if you want to mess around. I was also messing around with like Lamort card for a while with nature. It's just not as practical because you're just not getting enough damage with it. I've seen some nice crits like 600k on Catwoman, but say you're doing like a boss fight and you wipe before you get 35%. Well, you just wasted that entire artifact because you got no damage from it compared to running like Strategist. And then after Lamort procs, basically it's useless. You get the extra 10% finisher damage, but I mean that's not really noticeable. So it's just Lamort card doesn't necessarily work with nature. I had some fun messing around with it, but it's just not as practical. So that's the alternate to Might single target. Okay, so for Might ranged, you're going to have a couple options here. The first one's going to be the most common run-of-the-mill gorilla rotation you're going to see. This is the one. There's not too many cases where you use it in terms of being able to use wolf or being able to use gorilla single target. But if you do need to something where you're doing a raid where it's all range damage, you want to stay AoE and stay safe, then you could use this gorilla. It's going to be the most common one. So just your 3 dots, Serpent Call, Briar, Vine Lash, Gorilla Form, Harvest. Once again, I'm taking the onus of taking a little bit of risk running Robot Sidekick in here and not running Voracious Plants. You can run that if you just need to stay in human form and DPS a bit more to get supercharge. You would want to run that instead of Robot Sidekick. I'm just taking this just for an extra slot, just like I did in single target. And then Gorilla Form, Amplified Heat Vision, Impaling Thorns, Voracious Plants, Harvest, Robot Sidekick. So very similar to single target. Really the only thing that changes is you're putting on Voracious Plants instead of Zip Tie Attack. That's really the only change. But it allows you to still have some. If there is a boss with a lot of ads, you could still do more damage here, more AoE damage with Heat Vision, Impaling Thorns. Heat Vision is still going to be single target. Impaling Thorns is still going to be the finisher. Plus it's the AoE component, and then Voracious Plants are a bit more AoE. So if you care more about boss damage, say the biggest example I can see here is Fire and Brimstone Elite Final Boss. So I would care more about boss damage, so I would use a single target gorilla rotation in that aspect. But if you want to do more AoE damage, then certainly by all means, then you'd use like Voracious Plants in that situation, where it's going to have better AoE damage, but less boss damage. So it just depends on what you're going for. But in terms of the loadout and rotation, that's what it look like there. So we'll show you here. Okay, so there you get the idea with nature. You get the idea why that you're pretty much losing to every nature DPS and Fire and Brimstone Elite final boss. Million, 1.7 mil, 1.5, 1.6, 1.3, 1.5, 1.2, and a mil. I think the mill that was halfway through Impaling Thorns, so that's where I stopped. So that was lower. That would have been 1.2, 1.3. So that's just the. We can chill at Robot Psychic. We're done now. But yeah, that's essentially the most basic gorilla range rotation you're going to find, and has devastating results because of Impaling Thorns being AoE. So you've got so it's very simple to get that damage. Doesn't require any kind of tricks, strategist, trans. So amplifier, robot psychic. That's about the only difference is technically, say you were running like a supercharged spam group, and you would just drop robot psychic and run like Neo Venom Boost or a chaotic growth, something like that. So you just run supercharge there, but obviously then you get a little bit trickier with your supercharge management. So that's one of how to make sure your dots don't drop, because even if Fire Brimstone Elite, they can drop if you have like Lex and come out at the wrong time and there's no ads to spread. So. But very simple damage, or sorry, not very simple rotation to get massive damage. So not every day you're going to be getting like 1.7 mil on 8 targets without a supercharge. Okay, so in terms of the wolf variant for range. Really the only thing that changes is that instead of Impaling Thorns that you would use in Gorilla, you're using Freezing Breath in Wolf. The reason why you don't use Sonic Shout is that Sonic Shout is mid-range. It's about the range of EMP, where Freezing Breath is max range. So that's all you're doing. The timing sometimes can be a bit awkward of being 6 seconds, but essentially you're holding Freezing Breath for about 4 seconds and then just tapping off of it and doing Voracious in between, basically. But the main, you want to be using Heat Vision for that AoE and the Burning Dot refresh, and then Freezing Breath for the 4 seconds to take advantage. So especially you'll get some nice spike parsers because of the Wolf crits on Freezing Breath, and then you've got basically just a Robot Psychic, Harvest, and everything else. So in terms of that, in terms of the human forms, looks the exact same, just Wolf instead of Gorilla. And that's it. And then Freezing Breath instead of Impaling Thorns. So the rotation looks about just like this. That's all it is there. So you're really just substituting in between Heat Vision and Freezing Breath whenever it's off cooldown, just using Voracious Plants and making sure you're keeping up Harvest as well. So it's similar damage to Gorilla in terms of Wolf crit. So 1.5, 1.2, 1.2, 1.3, 1.3, 1.4. So every about 20... Sidekick is still going. Screwing that up. Sidekick chill. So in terms of Wolf, yes, you could keep refreshing the dots if you wanted to. You wouldn't be able to do as often as the melee rotation because you don't have Scrap of Soul Cloak, but you could still do it just as well. So if you're refreshing, say, every like 30 seconds, if it's going to be a range AoE fight, you're still going to be getting the spike parses up to 1.5, which is going to be similar to what you're getting at in Gorilla. So certainly not too shabby, not much of a damage drop off compared to Wolf. It's just a little bit more awkward of a rotation with the cooldown being 6 seconds on Freezing Breath, but that's all it is there. So it gives you some range damage variance. Okay, for the precision side of the guide, we've got the spec here. So in terms of weapons, it's going to be dependent on what you're doing, single target, ranged, or AoE. So currently we're in the AoE setup, so it's going to be two-handed mastery. So you don't have to take any weapon mastery for this, it's just you're using typical Doomspin, so just maxing out the two-handed tree. In terms of iconic or movement mode powers, you don't need anything, super speed or acrobats, depending on, you could be any movement mode in terms of this setup, but there's no movement mode powers involved, so you're just taking whatever your move mode is. Same thing, iconic powers, you will be taking Neo Venom Boost and Robot Sidekick. And in terms of your stat points, Weapons Expert, critical attack chance, critical attack damage, putting everything into precision, and then all your remaining skill points go into might and power. In terms of a gear setup, weapons always going to be Blast Adapter. Head mod's going to be Supercharged Neo Venom Boost 3. Neck mods is going to be Relentless Precision. Back mod, there's really no back mod specific to nature. There's no like accelerated carnage or anything like that, so you're just running Berserker, or if you want to run the breakout protection, something like that for survivability, that's completely fine as well. Chest mods, Penetrating Strikes, just the go-to chest mod. Leg mod, once again, there's no leg mods at scale whatsoever anyway, so you don't have to worry about them. In terms of utility belt, once again, that's personal preference, spy drop, orbital, the damage trinket, and a pet. In terms of if you're looking for the strength of the pets, you can refer to my testing videos for that. Hand mod's going to be max damage. Feet mod, Tumbling Mastery, just once again, it's kind of runoff, doesn't impact anything. And now in terms of artifacts, Transformation card and the Strategist card are going to be the go-to for every single precision build. Now the one difference here compared to my previous videos, you do have the choice. You can run the Venomous Dispenser, that is perfectly okay, but now the Gnorum has started to come out better in testing versus the Venomous Dispenser, because the Venomous Dispenser, remind you, you do get that precision buff, but it's only for 6 seconds, so really that only impacts about 2 parsers in terms of the damage, and so you get a lot of spike damage, but in terms of now that our CR raises, the Gnorum's damage is based on CR. So now that our CR is higher, and in the future as our CR increases, the damage from the Gnorum increases. So that's where the more passive damage you get from the pet, that's always out, and does have a lot of health itself, so it is quite tanky compared to, like, say, Robot Sidekick or Crystal and Fury, etc. So the Venomous Dispenser, don't scrap it if you already have it, you certainly use that instead, but you will see better damage overall using the Gnorum now, just because of that higher passive damage. And then, affinity mod bonuses. I don't have Elite Gear on test server, but obviously your Type A would be Precision, Type B would be Precision as well. In terms of augments, same thing. You can have Precision Head Augments, Adaptive, and then Precision Origin in your bottom. And I shouldn't have to show the base generator mod, but obviously you're going to have, you have a choice. You could do 4 in health, 4 in power. Doesn't really matter. The only thing that would impact would be if you're running the cog, because then you want higher health. But obviously the 4 reds will be precision based. Okay, so let's get into the specs here. Okay, so in terms of a loadout for melee, obviously it's going to be 2-handed based, being Doomspin. We got Thorn Burst, Carnage, Serpent Call, Pariah, and Vine Lash, and Neo Venom Boost. So typically, you're just setting up your 3 dots and then going to Doomspin using Thorn Burst and Carnage. So it's a very straightforward layout for your Precision Armory. I will explain, there could be a timestamp later why I don't recommend setting up your dots on Wolf then going out into Doomspin. I've seen a few people doing that, and it's just not very practical. So I'll explain that. And the reason why we're still keeping Neo Venom Boost, because it just, in terms of the damage potential in that duration window for Neo Venom Boost using Doomspin, a high multi-hit combo, compared to always running Robot Sidekick as extra passive damage. So let's get into the rotation here. Okay, so you kind of get the gist of the rotation there. Very straightforward. Depending on when Thornburst is hit in the rotation, you're going to be over a million damage. Basically, that's why it doesn't show as exactly. It'd be better showing this in 30-second pulses. That's why you see the dips between like 1,000,000, 93, 1,000,000. It's just the off rotation that Thornburst is being used. So that's why you can see the dips, but they would be more spread out over a 30-second pulse. But I mean, you can easily say when you're using regular Thornburst, same thing. Over a million, over a million, 1.1 million, another 1.1 million, and then you can have the dips when you have the off Thornburst rotation, which are going to be, almost 900k, mid 900k, almost a million there. So the same thing. If I was using Venomous Dispenser, it'd be similar damage, except that the spikes would be on the 10-second pulse where I was using Neovenom Boost. Sorry, not Neovenom Boost. Using Carnage. So that's why that's the only difference you'd see. You'd see a little bit higher spikes in the Carnage rotation, but that's only going to happen once every 12 seconds. And then that only lasts for that one parse being 6 seconds, then going back to the damage, where the Grim damage, you're going to have that passive damage throughout the exact same time. You're going to have constant damage using the Grim. So once again, you can still use Venomous Dispenser if you have it. Don't worry about it. That's the only difference you're going to see, is you're going to see higher spikes, but then lower lows, where the Gnorm, you're going to see more constant, steady damage. Okay, so for precision single target, we're going to be basing this off a dual-wield mastery build, which means that in terms of your weapon, you'll be having to max out the dual-wield tree. I would spend the 1 extra skill point in explosive shot mastery, because there'll be plenty of times where a boss might have adds beside it, or an AoE component to the fight, where you could have an explosive shot mastery combo instead of having that. It's just 1 extra skill point. It's no big deal at all. Max out the bow tree. Same thing in terms of acrobats. Just take your movement mode. You're not using any movement mode weapons, or power, sorry, so you don't have to worry about that. Iconic powers, robot sidekick, just a carryover from the range build, but you want to be Neovenom Boost. And in terms of your stat points, it all stays the same. So weapons expert, your crits, precision, and everything else in might and power. So in terms of a loadout, Harvest, Carnage, and basically your 3 dots: Super Call, Briar, Vine Lash, and Neovenom Boost. There's going to be a timestamp that you can check out later in the video. If you check in the comment section why I don't use Wolf for this, I find it just not very practical. There's a lot of people I've seen, not a lot of people, but I've seen people set up all their dots for a single target in Wolf and then transform back to human and allows them to buy them like an extra power in terms of like robot sidekick. So technically, best case scenario, yes, you can get higher damage doing that, but that's one of the things where it works great on sparring targets, because this is a sparring target, nothing going wrong. Where in terms of you're in a raid, something happens, there's plenty of bosses that have phases where they're immune, and your dots would drop, or something would happen, you have to block, your dots drop, boom, you have to go back into Wolf, and then you're wasting supercharge that if you ran a Neovenom Boost, you may not even have another 2500. So I'll touch on that in that section, but that's why I don't set up my dots in Wolf and then go back to human. I just stick in human for the entire time. So we'll touch on more detail in that timestamp if you want to check that out. But very straightforward in terms of a loadout there. Okay, well, you get the gist there. I am a wee bit rusty with my flurry shots, having done precision in a while. But obviously the first parsers is going to be low because you're setting up your dots. Then you go into typical what you're going to get anywhere in the 40. So this one, 70 hits compared to the others. That's because I think I did a couple flurry shots that were 3 ticks instead of 4 or 5. So that's why I had lower number of flurry shots, which is why I dipped down to 37. But typically, depending on your crits, 40, 48, 42, 48, which is roughly going to be where you're sitting at with a nature single target. So with the precision side, not much going on, obviously, because you just, 3 loadout slots are taken up by dots and you're just doing flurry shots. The reason why you can't do harvest only on the Carnage clip is because with Carnage being 12 seconds, it's too tight a window to always clip harvest with Carnage. So you have to do it before the Carnage cooldown is up, or you're going to lose your dots. So basically, rule of thumb is doing it every 4th flurry shot rotation. Because the Carnage itself lasts for 12 seconds, but the weapon buff itself, like if you go here, if I show it in the combat log here, it lasts for 20 seconds. So the cooldown is 12 seconds, but you get 20 seconds with Carnage. So don't worry about if your Carnage cooldown comes up and you haven't clipped it, harvest with it. Despite that fact, you still have the weapon buff for an additional 8 seconds, so you don't have to worry about that. You just have to make sure they're using harvest before that Carnage cooldown comes up, or your dots are going to drop, and then you're wasting more time setting them up again. So that's really the only thing you have to watch about. It's too tight a timing to clip harvest with Carnage on that 12-second window, because if you're even short like half a second, you've lost all your dots, and then you have to set them up again. So it's just not worth that. Do it like every fourth rotation, and then clipping the second rotation with Carnage and going back into it. That's all it is. And then depending on your strat procs, you can get up to 50s with it in the mid 50s. That's just depending on the raid situations and what kind of strategist procs you get, and if you're doing flurry shot correctly. I don't precision DPS much. The only time I do precision DPS is the odd time on the EU, but I haven't really been battle trolling much this DLC because it's been more buff trolling. So that's really my only opportunity to practice flurry shotting, so I can get a bit rusty on it. So results may differ. If you're better with flurry shot than I am, then obviously you're going to see more consistent results with the nature single target. Okay, so in terms of range damage for precision, it's very similar to the single target armory, except that the only difference is that you're not using a Neo boost or supercharge at all, and you're just using robot sidekick. So it's still going to be a dual spec. You're going to be using dual explosive shot. So if you go down to the weapon tree, dual wield, you're speccing down to, well, technically you could do flurry shot master anyway, because just in case you have to do single target, same thing, it's only 1 extra skill point, but you're taking explosive shot mastery and then speccing max into bow to bring it down. So that's the only difference spec-wise. In terms of loadout, the reason why we do this is that, let's just see here. Let's just drop robot sidekick for a sec so it doesn't attack. So Neo Venom boost lasts roughly 20 seconds in terms of the damage you're going to get from it. So if we look at... Sorry. Should have set that up properly here for a sec. So now show the parses. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and there it is. So in the duration of a Neo Venom boost, you're only going to get 9 dual explosive shots off, and that's like perfect case scenario. That means you're not getting interrupted. You didn't have to move or block. So in a perfect case scenario, you're getting only 9 dual explosive shots because of its being a slow-natured weapon mastery combo. So you're hoping that the nature dot damage you're going to get is not going to be high enough on Neo Venom boost, even with the increase in damage. So you're looking at best case scenario, your Neo Venom boost is going to be impacted by only 9 combos, 8 depending on if you went into it exactly as you pop Neo Venom boost. So it's just the fact that If you're using Venomous Dispenser, that's where Venomous Dispenser will come into play. If you clip Neon Venom Boost with Carnage, yes, your spikes are going to be a lot higher because of the weapon buff from Venomous. But if you're running the Grim, Neon Venom Boost doesn't impact the Grim at all, doesn't impact the Peck damage at all. So it's one of those things where, for range specifically, there's no point in using a supercharge. You're better off just having passive damage from Robot Psychic added onto your parses, because not an entire raid is going to be range damage. You want to save your supercharge for melee for Doomspin and for single target for Flurry Shot. That's where you'll see the damage increase because it's much greater combos you're getting in that small duration for a new Venom Boost, where you're not taking full advantage of it in a range situation with using Dual Explosive Shot. So that's why I don't run a supercharge just for nature range. I've seen some people mix in like Voracious Plants. You could do that as well. The timing gets a little bit weird. I've seen much lower parses with that compared to just the strict similar rotation. So that's why I don't run a supercharge for range. If there's no point of it, I'd rather save the 5,000 supercharge for one of those situations where I'll get more damage out of it, which is going to be a melee with Doomspin or a single target with Flurry Shot. So in terms of the actual loadout, it's just going to be Harvest, Carnage, Serpent Call, Briar, Vine Lash, and Robot Psychic. So the exact same thing as single target, except you just have running Robot Psychic as a 6 power, just for basically, think of an extra dot, but it's just extra passive damage. That's all you're looking for, because you're not going to be ranging that much, for ranging AoE. So it's just from those situations where you have to, then you're not wasting a supercharge. You're saving it for a more optimal time. Okay, so there you have it for precision ranged. In terms of the parsing, obviously your first parse is going to be lower because you're setting up all the dots. Once again, that's because I'm doing this in 10-second durations instead of 30. So as you can see, right at a typical parser, you're getting almost 1 million damage just from range. 87, you're going to have lower dips there, because this is entirely dependent on how often dual explosive shot crits, because that's where your damage is coming from, so it's slower damage. So if you do get some nice crits or some strat procs on that, then you're looking good, sitting at around 1 million, 8.7, 77, 72, 79, 70, back up to 94. So you can still see it's perfectly fine damage. You don't have to worry about running a supercharge because you're just running the extra damage from Robot Sidekick. So you're still doing competitive range AoE damage, not having to worry about fumbling around worrying about Wolf, or fumbling around worrying about a supercharge and wasting supercharge on that. So that's where you're seeing it, range precision. So very straightforward loadout, very hard hitting rotation, just be how the benefits of having the 3 dots and precision at once. Okay, so the reason why I don't recommend and don't use Wolf, set up the precision dots and then go back into human to actually do the DPSing. Of course, it's going to be higher damage potentially. So you're going to be seeing much higher parsers on sparring targets, but that's because sparring targets are a perfect situation. That's just nature as a whole. So nature itself are going to be seeing highest parsers out of pretty much any power set because it's all perfect situations. You could pop gorilla melee, go on the 8 targets and see like giant parsers that no one can even touch. You can go into Wolf and do single target parsers that no one's ever going to match, stuff like that. That's because sparring targets are the perfect situation. You're never going to see that actually in a raid because things are going to die. You're not going to be able to keep your dots perma-refreshed. That's not going to happen. So the reason why I don't recommend this is that you're queuing up into a raid, clock tower lead, whatever, clock tower. You have to go into Wolf. Then you have to set up the 3 dots. Then you have to go back. Then you have to clip your powers. And then start doom spinning. So that whole process can take anywhere from like 10 to 12 seconds. You're doing no damage. All the damage you're doing is like the little dot ticks in the background. So while all the other DPS in your group have already done doom spinning, they're dropping their Neo Venoms, their supplies, their berserks. All the Might DPS are doing their Whirling Dervish. The whole entire time you're doing that, you're doing no damage because you're setting up dots on targets that are going to die within 15-20 seconds anyway. What sort of ad set is going to do that? And then by the time you're done that, you're going to have to drop to Wolf again to set up your dots on the next set of ads. So it's just, there's no set of ads in this entire game that are going to last that long to warrant you dropping in and out of Wolf that quickly just to set that up. On a Might side, that works because you can still have 2 dots. You can't run all 3, but you can at least run 2. So you can run it situationally, but it's not practical whatsoever to do that kind of setup with precision. Yes, you'll be seeing higher damage because you can run Sidekick. So if you see people parsing like that and showing you, hey, I'm getting huge parsers on melee, getting 1.5 mil, whatever, that's because it's a sparring target and that's not actually in a raid. If you see any kind of Prec DPS with nature setting up their dots in Wolf and then going back to human to start doom spinning, it's just they're losing massive damage. They're going to be doing great damage for like 10 seconds, and when the ads die, it's going to be useless. So something like that I thought was common sense. I've seen some people run it, so that's why I had to bring it up in this guide. That's the reason why I don't recommend it. It should be common sense, but one of those things where you're going to see sparring target parsers or screenshots of parsers saying, hey, I got these numbers. Well, that's why, because it's a perfect raiding situation. You don't have to worry about in-game lag in a raid. You don't have to worry about dying, losing your supercharge. So you're saying that if you want to run Neo Venom Boost too, if you use a Neo Venom Boost and then your dots drop and you have to go back into Wolf because ads died, well, there you just zapped half your supercharge running a Neo Venom Boost. So it's just something that's not practical whatsoever. There might be like one niche situation where it'll work, but it's just don't do it. Just use a regular loadout. It takes like 3 seconds to set up all 3 dots. Boom, you can go right into doom spin instead of the 10 to 12 seconds it takes to set up all your dots in this kind of situation. So there it is, guys. Okay, so we're on to the nature healing side of the guide. Now, in terms of the spec, this is going to vary depending on my personal preference, your personal preference, what others may do. Like, there is no really set, you have to run this spec, you have to run this rotation as nature. You're going to see a lot of variation. Not a large variation, but you're going to see some power substituted. So this is basically what I do. So in terms of spec, I always spec hybrid. Once again, if you find yourself running out of power or you don't want to use your weapons as much, don't worry about it. Spec superpowered then, easy change. You're still maxing out your crits. That's the important thing. Maxing out restoration. That is also the important thing. Next after that is going to be might and power. You want at least 100 in here because 100 gives you that 10% bonus tier. So nature is quite power heavy just because of the base power cost of them, which I'll show you once we get to the loadout. Other than that, dominance doesn't really impact it as much as you would think it would, being part of the healing formula. I choose to put about 16 here just because I've got extra skill points to spare, so it's not really an issue for me. But the priority for you is the middle tier, might and power. Everything else is just gravy, so it's just bonus on top. So I put some dominance, at least 60. It just gives me 8%. That's fine. And then I put the rest into health. So in terms of weapons, once again, I choose to do flare shots and explosive shots just for a little bit extra damage. It's not consequential at all. You don't have to do this. It takes up an extra 20 skill points to do it. So you could easily just do Hand Blast or Solar Flame to it. That's perfectly fine. Or just spec bow in general and just do regular flare shots. You could do that as well. So it's basically weapons, your personal choice. There's no like weapon you have to pick for nature healing or any kind of healing in general. It's just a preference. In terms of acrobatics, because of nature's power heavy usage, I spec the innates just so I can get the most recovery back that I can. If you don't have the 6 skill points to spare for that, don't worry about it. Iconic powers, I choose to run Bloom. But once again, you don't have to. You could stick to the Broken Rotation and Bug. So in terms of loadouts, this is where you're going to see... Actually, we should touch on weapons and gear first. So weapon, dual wield, because of my choice. Replenishing adapter, head mod. There's really no head mod in general for nature anyway. So Bloom, regeneration, focus restoration, accelerated swarm shield, power efficiency. Once again, there's no scaling leg mod for any power, so don't worry about it. Hands are going to be max damage, and feet are going to be Tumbling Master. So in terms of trinkets, I choose to run the Creepy Jack from Halloween just because it gives a little bit extra restoration and basically heal you with your health loss full 40. It's not a great heal, it's just something extra to run. You could run a Boo if you wanted to. It's just that the Creepy Jack actually helps you heal because of the restoration, so that's why I run it. And then just the Resto Trinket, Spot Drop Orbital, so pretty standard there. In terms of artifacts, this is where the first variation is going to happen with nature. My personal choice, because of all the nature dots, it is the best healer set up to run Trans Strat in terms of that bonus. Plus, most likely, if you're a DPS anyway, you already have the Transformation and Strategist card leveled, so that's an easy choice for the two. But just with how many nature dots there are, the Transformation card works out. If there wasn't, then it wouldn't work out because the healing loss would be more noticeable. But because of all the extra dots, or extra heal over time, 0 hots, you don't notice it as much. And then basically it practices your strategist more often because you have more hots, much more hots critting compared to other healer power sets. So that's a good combination there. In terms of the third one, you could run Page of Destiny. You could also run the Orb, which is somewhere here, I think. Yeah, right there. I guess I was blind for a second there. You could run the Orb because of Blossom's PI. So basically, this will change your Blossom into a much higher power cost. Oh, sorry. Mine's because mine's level 80. I'm not healing after this. I'm switching tanks. So that's why these are rank 0. But normally, it would change your Blossom. But because Blossom works off the PI, so I can see here, additional health when used on allies with pheromones. So you get a boost with the Orb. The Orb could be at 120, it's fine. I only healed with the Orb at 120. You still get the 9 seconds. It's not worth... This is not worth a 200 artifact. So you could run the Orb, that's your option as well. You could also run the Page. I don't recommend running the Page. If you heal other healer power sets, like if you switch between Water, Celestial, all that, you're going to have the Page level anyway because the Page is really good for other healer power sets. I choose not to because Metabolism is a different kind of group heal. Normally it would be a burst heal, like if you're running like water, electric, like your group heal is a burst heal, which is very beneficial. That's why it's helpful to run them. So 100% in that situation, use it. But Metabolism in this case, it's a 450 power cost, and the group heal to heal over time. So you're not getting any burst heal by spamming Metabolism as you would with another healer power set. So basically, you could spam that all day if you want, but by running Flourish, you're going to refresh that anyway. So it's not as beneficial to you because you're going to have it out anyway. Your Savage Grow with Metabolism, you're going to be refreshing that with Flourish using your priorities. So it's just with nature, you could still stack the Page, but it's a much higher power cost to be spamming, and it's not as beneficial as it would be. So that's just my reasoning behind it. It may differ. The Page is still an amazing heal artifact for sure. It's one you're going to want ideally at least at 160. 200 gets you the additional 2 targets. So it is a very, very good healing artifact. It's just that it's not as optimal for nature. That's all it is. So if you have it leveled, of course, use it for nature. But it's not as optimal as it would be because Metabolism is not the same type of group heal as other power sets. The other choice will be either Gemini. This is if you're using bug form build. So if you're going to be spamming the broken combo with insectoid form, we're insectoid form a year ago. Did I just miss it again? Insectoid form. So with it being every 12 seconds, you can pop in and out of it, supercharge with the Gemini. So you could technically do that. I'm hoping it's going to be fixed. Obviously not in time for this video, but I'm hoping in the near future it's going to be fixed, because it is completely broken. It breaks the whole point of changing the healing supercharger, so you couldn't be spamming it. So obviously if you want to help the group and spam supercharge, you'd have to have either Gemini to be useful in that case. Or you could run Bloom obviously as well, but once again, it's much more impactful running insectoid form, which I'll show in the kind of the loadout section of this guide as well. So that's about it. Basically, you're going to have these two artifacts. Same thing, you could sub out the transformation for page if you want to run page and orb. So you do have some options, except that my personal preference is to run transformation, strat, and orb. That's what I've recommended in my previous artifact videos. But same thing, everyone doesn't like the orb just because you can't spam the priority because of the power cost. It's going to change that to like a 900 power cost. So it's not as beneficial if you spam it, but it's... If you're nature healing, you're going to use one of these 5 artifact combinations. You're going to either using page, you're going to be using either orb or Gemini, depending on what you're doing. But the transformation strategist is a very beneficial combo for nature healing in particular. So that brings us to loadout. So really the standard loadout is what I run for this. I don't like to mess around with the healing supercharge. If you're going to spam bug, you're going to spam it, and then you just drop cross-pollination, and you see this. And basically just go into insectoid form. You can hit cross-pollen insectoid form if you want, just to have an extra healer, and then pop back. But you're going to be using Blossom, you're going to be using Metabolism, Savage Growth, Flourish is going to refresh your pheromones, and then Swarm Shield, and then your 6 power is going to be your power of choice. So I choose to run cross-pollination because it's another heal. It sets pheromones as well, and it's your NPC heal as well. So if you've got like an earth tank in there and need to heal brick, you'd use that. If you've got DPS using the source shard and need to heal their robot sidekicks and their grims and all their other pets for their DPSing, cross-pollination will do that. If you need to heal like NPC allies, like in this Birds of Prey content, so cross-pollination is entirely helpful. The other variation you'll see is some healers running Bloom. I personally don't like any of the channel heals. Some healers will say they're amazing and run it. It's just my personal choice. I wouldn't say I have as much wealth of healing knowledge as other players. Healing is probably the least thing I've done. I've always control tanked and DPS'd. But there's too many drawbacks to using a channeled heal. In my personal preference, it's something that players can't just pick up and just use because you're just going to be sitting in it. You're going to be in a raid. You're going to be sitting in the Bloom transformation while other people are dying, and the healing is not that strong on it. Then you got to wait for the cooldown, which is quite long. You could jump cancel out early, and then you miss some of the heals. So it's something that I personally choose not to recommend. Other experiences may differ, but that's essentially what you'll see. You're going to see the exact same 5 powers in every nature healing rotation. The 6th one's going to differ. You're going to see either insectoid form, you're going to either see cross-pollination, you might see or Bloom. Or they might stay in permanent insectoid form, but personally I don't like that either because of the crits. So that's essentially where you're finding yourself with nature healing. So you could try different variations. I choose to run the most, this kind of cookie cutter standard build. It gives me the most options in terms of healing over times, in terms of Swarm Shield. So the reason why I said nature uses a lot of powers is Blossom 250, Metabolism is a 450, Savage Growth 300, 300, 300, and a 300. So that's very power heavy rotation in terms of every single power, 10,000, 10,000. So say if I clipped like Metabolism and Savage Growth together, that's almost that's a 26,000 power cost right there. And I'm sitting at a power pool of 84,000 power. So 26,000 power out of 84,000, that's a lot. So that's why a lot of healers can find themselves in trouble if they're just spamming nature abilities. And that's why that I spec power efficiency, and then I also recommend to spec into might and power as well. So let's kind of jump into and show kind of what the nature rotations look like and kind of give you some examples there. Okay, first I'm going to show the obviously broken rotations. You don't really have to question this at all. So putting Gemini on, sort of healer artifact, get yourself in combat, and then essentially, there you go. When Gemini runs out, I mean, I'm not actually using any other powers, but basically every time bug is off cooldown, you can go straight into it. And with the supercharge that you'd earn, you can just keep on hitting it. And then each rotation you're actually using it, you're barely not even using much. So if I'm hitting other powers, and obviously I can use that kind of regen. I could also have scrap the soul cloak if we really wanted to spam it more often. So that's what you don't want to do. Lots of people do. It's unavoidable, but it's one of those things where that's what the bug form spam needs to get fixed. So if you are doing that, then obviously you'd have to run Gemini, but that's just the perks of that rotation. So unfortunately that's what we have to deal with until that is corrected, because it doesn't follow any kind of rule in terms of the other healing supercharges. So let's kind of get to some sense of normalcy now. Okay, so for an actual healing rotation for nature, the only thing you have to be mindful of the rotation is with cross-pollination, it is range-based. So for the most optimal heal, you want to make sure all your group members are closer together. They don't have to be standing right beside each other, but they can't be super spread out. For example, if you're doing like Phoenix Cannon Elite First Boss with Lady Blackhawk, if you hit cross-pollination, the group is entirely spread out, then it's going to be a much weaker heal. But if they're close together, like say the final boss fight, where they're going to be not as much spread out, then you have a more optimal heal. But besides that, all you're doing is setting up your pheromones. So you've got your cross-pollination pheromone, savage growth, metabolism, and then once you have all those pheromones out at the same time, you're getting the stratus procs. Flourish is going to refresh them. And if you're running the Page of Destiny, then you just kind of keep clipping metabolism and blossom together, making sure that you're keeping the hots refreshed with flourish. But that's all you're doing. Mixing in Swarm Shield when you have to. It's only a 3-man shield. That's what Nature Healing does suffer from, is that it does not have that extra heal. But that's all you're doing. Making sure hots are always out. Flourish and refresh. And just clipping metabolism and blossom off cooldown if you want to have that max stack with Page of Destiny. So that's essentially all it is. So as you can see, that's the type of healers you're seeing. Not sure, I'm just getting constantly attacked here. But as you can see, the amount of hots that I'll be getting, I can basically just heal myself with this 10, basically it's a 12k dot, and I can keep it pretty much entirely healed just with the heal over times. I don't even have to worry about hitting my instant. Eventually I would, just depending on how many kind of crits I get, but obviously that's without even hitting one priority. So that's essentially what Nature Healing is all about. You don't necessarily have to run a supercharge. You could just as easily not run a supercharge for it. It's basically just maximizing heal over times and all your strategy procs.